The moment the doctor walked out of the delivery room, everyone thought the story had already ended. A grieving husband stood frozen beneath the harsh hospital lights, his hands trembling, his shirt stained with the tears he had wiped from his face again and again. Behind him, his wife's family was already whispering about the funeral, while his own parents were making plans that had nothing to do with mourning. And across the hallway, the woman who had secretly been waiting for his marriage to collapse was smiling as if she had finally won. Nobody noticed the doctor standing just a few feet away, staring at the newborn monitor with an expression that would soon change everything. If you believe that kindness can give people a second chance and that love can survive even the darkest moments, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Sometimes a story begins with heartbreak, but it ends by reminding us that miracles can arrive when we least expect them. His name was Everett Rowan, a quiet 34-year-old architect who had spent most of his adult life trying to build a peaceful home. His wife, Mireya, had been the person who made the dream feel possible. They had met during a rainy afternoon at a small bookstore, where Mireya had accidentally knocked a stack of books into his arms. She had laughed, apologized, and somehow turned an ordinary moment into the beginning of a life together. After 3 years of marriage, they had finally received the news they had prayed for. Mireya was pregnant. The pregnancy had not been easy. She became tired quickly, suffered through endless appointments, and often woke during the night with her hand resting protectively over her growing stomach. Everett never complained about the extra responsibilities. He cooked, cleaned, attended appointments, and talked to the babies even when Mireya teased him for doing so. They had been told they were expecting one child, and they spent months choosing names, painting a nursery, and imagining the day they would finally hold their baby. But while Everett was building a future with Mireya, someone else was quietly trying to destroy it. Her name was Celestine Vale, a woman who had once worked closely with Everett's father. Celestine had convinced herself that Everett belonged with her. She had no interest in waiting for fate. She wanted his marriage to end, and she wanted to be the person standing beside him when it did. She began sending him messages, appearing at places he visited, and spreading carefully chosen lies to his family. Everett rejected her every time, but his parents believed her version of events more than they believed their own son. His mother, Octavia, had always disliked Mireya because she came from a modest family. Everett's father, Bram, cared more about social standing and business connections than his son's happiness. When Celestine entered their lives, they welcomed her without hesitation. To them, Mireya was temporary, while Celestine seemed like someone who could improve the family's image. Everett tried to protect his wife from their cruelty, but he could not protect her from everything. On a bright Tuesday morning, sunlight poured through the windows of their apartment as Mireya suddenly doubled over in pain. Everett rushed toward her, and within minutes they were on their way to the hospital. Mireya held his hand tightly in the car, trying to smile even though fear was visible in her eyes. Everett kept telling her everything would be fine, because he needed to believe it himself. At the hospital, nurses quickly moved her into a delivery room. Everett stood beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. Hours passed. The afternoon light faded into evening, and the bright hospital windows reflected the first city lights outside. Then something went wrong. The cheerful rhythm of the medical team changed. Nurses moved faster. A monitor began sounding repeatedly. Everett saw the color drain from the doctor's face, and suddenly the room seemed much smaller. Mireya became unconscious. Everett was forced into the hallway as the medical team fought to save her and the baby. He stood against the wall, whispering prayers he had not spoken since childhood. He promised that if she came back to him, he would never take another ordinary morning for granted. He promised he would spend the rest of his life making her laugh. But the doors stayed closed. Nearly an hour later, a doctor finally stepped out. Everett knew the answer before the doctor spoke. The doctor looked down, took a slow breath, and told him that Mireya had suffered a catastrophic complication during labor. Despite every attempt to save her, they had lost her. Everett collapsed into a chair. For several seconds, he could not breathe. The hallway blurred. His hands covered his face as a sound escaped him that he had never made before. His wife, his best friend, the mother of his child, was gone. Then came the cruelest question of all. Everett looked up and asked whether the baby had survived. The doctor hesitated. Before he could answer, Octavia arrived with Bram and Celestine. Instead of rushing to comfort Everett, they spoke quietly among themselves. Celestine was wearing an elegant dress and carrying flowers, but there was something disturbingly calm about her expression. Bram told Everett that he needed to be strong and think about the future. Octavia spoke about family responsibilities. Celestine stood nearby with tears carefully placed in her eyes. But then Everett heard something that shattered him all over again. Celestine quietly said that perhaps this tragedy was a sign that life was giving Everett another chance. Everett stared at her in disbelief. He had just lost the woman he loved, and Celestine was already imagining herself in Mireya's place. He told them to leave him alone. For the first time, he did not care what his parents thought. The hospital hallway became strangely quiet. Then the doctor returned. He walked toward Everett slowly, but his expression was different now. He leaned closer and whispered something that made Everett lift his head. "It's twins." Everett stared at him. The doctor explained that during the emergency, the medical team had discovered something that had not appeared clearly on the earlier scans. Mireya had been carrying two babies. One baby had been positioned behind the other, making the pregnancy extremely difficult to detect accurately. Both babies had survived the emergency delivery. Everett's lips trembled. Twins. Two children. Mireya had not left him with one little piece of herself. She had left him with two. The doctor continued, explaining that the babies were premature and would require intensive care, but their hearts were beating. They were fighting. Everett began crying so hard that he could barely stand. He asked to see them. Through the neonatal intensive care unit window, he saw two tiny babies lying beneath warm lights, surrounded by machines and tubes. One had a tiny hand pressed against the blanket. The other moved weakly, as if trying to reach for something only they could feel. Everett placed his palm against the glass. He whispered that their mother had fought for them, and now he would fight for them too. Behind him, Octavia and Bram stood speechless. Celestine, however, looked horrified. The tragedy she had expected to use as an opportunity was suddenly not the tragedy she had imagined. Everett was not alone. He had two newborn children, and every part of him was now focused on protecting them. The following weeks were brutal. Everett slept in a hospital chair. He learned how to prepare tiny bottles, understand monitor alarms, and recognize the smallest movements of his children. He gave them names Mireya had once written inside a notebook, Solen and Kalen. He carried that notebook everywhere. Every night, when the hospital became quiet, he read Mireya's handwritten notes. She had written about their future, about birthday cakes, first steps, school uniforms, family vacations, and the kind of father she believed Everett would become. One sentence broke him every time. She had written that she hoped their children would grow up knowing that their father never gave up on them. Everett decided he would make that promise real. Meanwhile, the truth about Celestine began to emerge. A nurse discovered that Celestine had repeatedly visited the hospital before Mireya's delivery and had tried to obtain private information about the pregnancy. Everett's sister-in-law, who had always defended Mireya, found messages proving that Celestine had been spreading lies about Mireya for months. Then Bram discovered something even worse. Celestine had been celebrating Mireya's death because she believed Everett would finally marry her. But Everett had already made his decision. He would never allow someone who had celebrated his wife's death to become part of his children's lives. When the twins finally grew strong enough to leave the hospital, Everett carried one baby while his sister carried the other. He walked through the hospital doors into bright morning sunlight. For the first time since Mireya died, he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a grateful one. He looked down at his children and realized that grief and love could exist in the same heart. He would always miss Mireya. He would always wish she could have held them. But he would not let her memory become only a story about how she died. He would make it a story about how fiercely she loved. Years passed. Solen grew into a thoughtful little girl who loved books, just like her mother. Kalen became a curious boy who followed his father everywhere and wanted to know how everything worked. Everett kept Mireya's notebook in a wooden box and added photographs to it every year. His parents eventually apologized. Bram admitted that he had judged Mireya without knowing her. Octavia confessed that pride had blinded her. Everett forgave them, but he never forgot what happened. As for Celestine, she disappeared from their lives after the truth became public. Everett never remarried simply because he was afraid of being alone. He learned that love was not something to replace. Mireya would always have a place in his heart, and his children would always know her name. On the twins' 7th birthday, Everett took them to the cemetery. He placed 2 small bouquets beside their mother's grave. The children stood quietly while the sunlight moved through the trees. Everett told them that their mother had been brave, kind, and stronger than anyone realized. He told them that she had given everything so they could have a chance at life. Solan placed her hand on the gravestone. Kalen whispered that he wished he could have met her. Everett knelt beside them and told them that they had already met her in the most beautiful way possible. Every time they laughed, every time they helped someone, every time they chose kindness over cruelty, a piece of their mother lived again. The children hugged him. And Everett finally understood something he had spent years learning. Sometimes life takes someone from us without warning. Sometimes justice arrives late. Sometimes the people who should comfort us become the people who hurt us most. But love can leave behind something stronger than grief. It can leave behind courage. It can leave behind hope. And sometimes, when you think your entire world has ended, 2 tiny heartbeats remind you that the story is not over. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in family, forgiveness, and second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy for more emotional stories that remind us that even after the darkest night, there can still be a morning. And before we end, I have one special request. Comment 2 hearts, 1 miracle if you believe that love can survive even after loss. Because Mireya never got to hold her twins. But she left them the greatest gift a mother could ever leave behind, the chance to live, to love, and to carry her kindness into a world she would never get to see.